Okay, begin.
Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vincent St. John. Together with my colleagues, Ms. Ria Clement and Samantha Harley, we're going to present to you Chapter 6, Courage and Moral Leadership, from the book entitled The Leadership Experience by Richard Daft. Let's begin. Being a real leader means learning who you are and what you stand for, and then having the courage to act. Leaders demonstrate confidence and commitment in what they believe and what they do. Placing others ahead of yourself is key to successful leadership, whether in politics, war, education, sports, social services, or business. Next slide, please. This chapter explores ideas related to courage and moral leadership, and these are the objectives that we're going to be covering. We're going to combine a rational approach to leadership with a concern for people and ethics, recognize your own stage of moral development and ways to accelerate your moral maturation, know and use mechanisms that enhance an ethical organizational culture, apply the principles of stewardship and servant leadership, recognize courage in others, and unlock your own potential to live and act courageously. Next slide. What is moral leadership? Well, moral leadership is distinguishing right from wrong and doing right, seeking the just, honest, and good in the practice of leadership. Being a real leader means learning who you are and what you stand for, and then having the courage to act. Leaders demonstrate confidence and commitment in what they believe and what they do. A deep devotion to a cause or a purpose larger than oneself sparks the courage to act. Next slide, please. Here we have a great example of courage and moral leadership in General Eric Shinseki. Next slide, please. This is his story. In Washington, D.C., February 23rd, 2003, General Shinseki went against his civilian boss, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mr. Donald Rumsfeld, in the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee hearing on the impending war in Iraq. General Shinseki stated that post-war peacekeeping efforts would take several hundred thousand troops. And this comment was in direct opposition to what Mr. Rumsfeld had been trying to convince the same committee. Next slide, please. Mr. Rumsfeld stated that only a few ground troops would be required. Even though this move by the general could potentially end his career, he had the courage to take the moral high ground to express the truth. As a person in a leadership position, that would more than likely preserve many young lives. Shinseki's story shows that true leaders put others ahead of themselves, whether in politics, war, education, sports, social services, or business. Next slide, please. So, what is moral leadership like today? Next slide. Every decade sees its share of political, social, and corporate villains, but the pervasiveness of ethical lapses in recent years has been astounding. Country, we see a lot of ethical lapses. In politics, we have examples such as the government renting buildings to house their office staff for obscene amounts of money that are owned by certain government officials. Even though some of these ministries have buildings owned by the government that just need a little refurbishment, sometimes at a cost less than what is being paid in rent for the year. We also see these lapses in business. Government contracts to certain business owners who weren't even qualified. The Piarco Airport project scandal. Or what about multiple firearm user license issued to one individual to own and carry firearms that are more powerful than what the regiment or the police force has? I'm sure there are other examples, but I doubt we have the time to mention them all. Next slide, please. The ethical climate lapses occur at all levels of organizations, but top leaders in particular face closer scrutiny since they are the ones in the spotlight. What's going on at the top trickles down through organizations and society. When leaders fail to set and live up to high ethical standards, organizations, employees, shareholders, and the general public suffer. Unethical and illegal practices in business have adverse effects and lead to serious consequences for organizations. For one thing, companies have a hard time attracting good employees. When current employees lose trust in leaders, morale, commitment, and performance suffer. Investments may also withdraw their support from the company or even file suit if they believe they've been lied to and cheated. Next slide, please. Take the example of Bernie Madoff. He developed a Ponzi scheme that enticed people to invest a lot of money to the tune of millions. Many people invested their life savings and lost it. Though that is bad enough, there were even worse consequences to his unethical behavior. If you know the story, which there are a number of movies about it, next slide. The most notable one is The Wizard of Lies, starring Robert De Niro. We see that when it all came crashing down, he went to prison, his wife left him, one of his sons changed his name, and the other killed himself. A family completely destroyed. Next slide. Leaders at all levels carry a tremendous amount of responsibility for setting the ethical climate and can act as role models for others. However, leaders face many pressures that challenge their ability to do the right thing. The most dangerous obstacles for leaders are personal weaknesses and self interest rather than full scale corruption. Pressures to cut costs, increase profits, meet the demands of vendors or business partners to look successful can all contribute to ethical lapses. The question for leaders is whether they can summon the fortitude to do the right thing despite outside pressures. Next slide. Food for thought. Life is lived on a slippery slope, says Harvard Business School's Richard Tedlow. It takes a person of character to know what lines you don't cross. Next slide. So, what leaders do to make things go wrong? Leaders signal what matters through their behavior. And when leaders operate from principles of selfishness and greed, many employees come to see unethical behavior as okay. We have the example of the Enron executives and their unethical behavior. They, the senior executives, were openly arrogant and ambitious for personal success and blatantly flouted rules and regulations, basic fairness, and honor to achieve personal gain. They created an atmosphere of, well, everyone else is doing it, so what's the harm? Leaders differ in how they view human nature and the tactics they use to get things done through others. Next slide. So the qualities of an unethical leader. Leader as a hero is an outdated notion, but some executives are preoccupied with their own importance and take every opportunity to feed their greed or nourish their own egos. They focus on having a huge salary, a big office, and other symbols of status rather than on what is good for the organization. These leaders typically pay more attention to gaining benefits for themselves rather than for the organization or larger society. Top executives who expect big salaries and perks at the same time the company is struggling and laying off thousands of workers are not likely to create an environment of trust and integrity. Unethical leaders are dishonest with employees, partners, customers, vendors, and shareholders, and they regularly fail to honor their agreements or commitments to others. Unethical leaders also frequently treat people unfairly, perhaps by giving special favors or privileges to followers who flatter their egos. Often promote people based on favoritism rather than concrete business results. Take all the credit for successes, but they blame others when things go wrong. By taking credit for followers' accomplishments, failing to allow others to have meaningful participation in decision making. Generally, treat people with discourtesy and significantly diminish the dignity of others. They see followers as a means to an end, and they show little concern for treating people as individuals or helping followers develop their own potential. If a leader knows someone is being treated unfairly by a colleague and does nothing, the leader is setting a precedent for others to behave unfairly as well. Peers and subordinates with lax ethical standards feel free to act as they choose. Next slide. And ethical leaders are individuals who exhibit a strong commitment to ethical principles, values, and moral conduct in their leadership roles. They set a positive example for others through their actions and decisions. For example, we have Mahatma Gandhi. Through his nonviolent and morally driven leadership, played a pivotal role in India's struggle for independence, demonstrating a commitment to ethics and justice. Ethical leaders serve others. Ethical leaders prioritize the well being and interests of their followers and the broader community over their personal gain or self interest. Example, Mother Teresa dedicated her life to serving the poor and marginalized in society, embodying the concept of ethical leadership by selflessly helping others. Ethical leaders speak up against acts they believe are wrong. Ethical leaders are unafraid to voice their concerns when they witness unethical or unjust behavior, even if it means challenging the status quo or facing opposition. Example, Rosa Parks, by refusing to give up her seat on a segregated bus, took a courageous stand against racial injustice, exemplifying ethical leadership in the face of discrimination. They don't withhold their tongues to fit in with the group. Ethical leaders do not compromise their moral principles or values to conform to group norms or peer pressure. They maintain their integrity even when it's challenging. For example, Nelson Mandela stood firm in his commitment to ending apartheid in South Africa, despite immense pressure from the ruling regime, showcasing ethical leadership by refusing to conform to an unjust system. Ethical leaders speak up against acts they believe are wrong. Sorry. Yeah. Ethical leaders foster an organizational culture that prioritizes honesty, accountability, and openness. They set high ethical standards for their teams and organizations. Example, Abraham Lincoln's leadership during the American Civil War was marked by a commitment to transparency and integrity. He emphasized the importance of truth and ethical conduct in government. Ethical leaders strive to maintain an environment of integrity and transparency. Ethical leaders play a crucial role in shaping positive outcomes for organizations, communities, and societies as a whole. Their unwavering dedication to ethical principles serves as a beacon for others to follow, promoting trust, fairness, and social justice. Now, we have this table here that shows everything about what the difference is between the ethical and unethical leadership. Next slide, please. Acting like a moral leader. Many leaders forget that business is about values, not just economic performance. Moral leadership doesn't mean ignoring profit and loss, stock price, production costs, and other hard measurable facts, but it does require recognizing the importance of moral values, human meaning, quality, and higher purpose. Despite the corporate realities of greed, competition, and the drive to achieve goals and profits, leaders can act from moral values and encourage others to develop and use moral values in the workplace.
Oh shit.
The single most
Right now,
important factor,
I think we are.
All right. The single most important factor in ethical decision making in organizations is whether leaders show a commitment to ethics in their talk and especially their behavior. Employees learn about the values that are important in the organization by watching leaders. Next slide. Exhibit 6.2 lists some specific ways leaders act to build an environment that allows and encourages people to behave ethically and morally. Leaders create organizational systems and policies that support ethical behavior, such as creating open door policies that encourage employees to talk about anything without fear, establishing clear ethics codes, rewarding ethical behavior, conduct, and showing zero tolerance for violations. Let's take a look. Now, I'm not going to name all 10, but I will just point out a couple of them. Um, they develop, articulate, and uphold high moral principles. They set the example you want others to live by. Be honest with yourself and others, and do the right thing in both your private and professional life, even if no one is looking. I mean, all of these are pretty self explanatory. Next slide, please. Most companies have established codes of ethics to guide employee behavior, such as the clear, concise statement used by Transworld Entertainment, shown in Exhibit 6.3. Each of the key points in Transworld's general statement of policy is described in detail in the company's complete code of ethics. I am sure most of you would have noticed at your place of employment a code of ethics or rules that you have to follow to maintain the company's integrity, not so? Let's take a look at it. No, back, please. All right, now you notice they say honesty and candor in our activities, including observance of the spirit as well as the letter of the law. You have compliance with generally accepted accounting principles and controls, integrity in dealing with the company's assets. Now, all of those are very, very important. Next slide, please. One must note, however, that an ethics code alone is not enough. Most importantly, leaders articulate and uphold high moral standards, and they do the right thing even if they think no one is looking. If leaders cut corners or bend the rules when they think they won't get caught, they and their organizations will ultimately suffer the consequences. Moreover, leaders realize that what they do in their personal lives carries over to the professional arena. Leaders are a model for the organization 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we have a classic example here of Ms. Justine Seiko, formerly a PR executive for the internet giant Interactive Corp, which owns popular websites like Match.com, Dictionary.com, and Vimeo. She was fired over a tweet that came from her account on Friday that read, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." Widespread controversy erupted while Seiko was reportedly mid-flight with no internet access. By the time her plane landed in Africa, she was fired. A visible leadership position entails the responsibility of conducting both one's personal and professional life in an ethical manner. Leaders build ethical organizations by demonstrating the importance of serving people and society, as well as winning football games or increasing business profits. Next slide, please. So, becoming a moral leader. Leadership is not merely a set of practices with no association with right or wrong. All leadership practices can be used for good or evil and thus have a moral dimension. Leaders choose whether to act from selfishness and greed, to diminish others, or in ways that serve and motivate others to develop to their full potential as employees and as human beings. Moral leadership is about distinguishing right from wrong and doing right, seeking the just, the honest, the good, and the right conduct in its practice. Leaders have great influence over others, and moral leadership gives life to others and enhances the lives of others. Moral leadership uplifts people, enabling them to be better than they were without the leader. Thus, some leadership qualities to develop are: encourage others to develop and use moral values in the workplace and personal life. Articulate and uphold high moral standards by doing the right thing even when no one is looking. Be a model for your organization 24/7, being aware that what happens in your personal life can seep into your professional. Build ethical organizations by demonstrating the importance of serving people. Leaders are responsible for building a foundation that strengthens and enriches the lives of organization members. Specific personality characteristics such as ego strength, self confidence, and a sense of independence may enable leaders to behave morally in the face of opposition. This chapter's Leaders Bookshelf argues that confidence is a key requirement of moral courage because it moves leaders from contemplating what is right to acting on their moral values. Moreover, leaders can develop these characteristics through their own hard work. People have choices about whether or not to behave morally. Next slide, please. Immoral leaders take away from others in order to enhance oneself. Leaders who would do evil towards others, such as Jean-Claude Duvalier of Haiti, also known as Baby Doc. Duvalier succeeded his father, Francois Duvalier, as the ruler of Haiti. His regime was notorious for its brutality, corruption, and human rights violations. The Duvalier family amassed significant wealth while the majority of the Haitian population lived in poverty. Another example, next slide, Fulgencio Batista of Cuba. Fulgencio Batista y Zaldivar was an exceptionally competent administrator, a shrewd judge of character, and a man of engaging personal charm. He was also a dictator who ruled Cuba for much of the 1940s and 1950s. His regime was marked by widespread corruption, human rights abuses, and close ties to organized crime. He, his oppressive rule eventually led to the Cuban Revolution, which brought Fidel Castro to power. I now hand you over to my colleague, Ms. Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Benson.
You're
Anyone
welcome.
has any questions so far? Okay, well, I now take you on to the next slide. I'll be discussing the three levels of personal moral development. A leader's capacity to make moral choices is related to the individual's level of moral development, as seen in this model. The first is pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. In Exhibit 6.4, you'll see the three levels of personal moral development. Let's look at pre-conventional. In pre-conventional, At the pre-conventional level, individuals are egocentric and concerned with receiving external rewards and avoiding punishments. They obey authority and follow rules to avoid detrimental personal consequences or satisfy immediate self-interest. The basic orientation towards the world is one of taking what one can get. Someone with this orientation in a leadership position would tend to be autocratic. They don't consider other people's wishes or opinions. They are domineering towards others and use the position for personal advancement. The next will be conventional. At level 2, the conventional level, people learn to conform to the expectations of good behavior as defined by colleagues, family, friends, and society. People at this level follow the rules, norms, and values in the corporate culture. If the rules are not to steal, cheat, make false promises, or violate regulatory laws, a person at the conventional level will attempt to obey. They adhere to the norm of the larger society social system. However, if the social system says it is okay to inflate bills to the government or make achieving the bottom line more important than integrity, people at the conventional level will usually go along with that norm also. Often, when organizations do something illegal, many managers and employees are simply going along with the system. Post-conventional now. At the post-conventional or principle level, leaders are guided by an internalized set of principles universally recognized as right and wrong, right or wrong. People at this level may even disobey rules or laws that violate these principles. These internalized values become more important than the expectations of other people in the organization or community. A leader at this level is visionary, empowering, and committed to serving others and a higher cause. In the book entitled Moral Courage, Taking Actions When Your Values Are Put to the Test by Rushworth Kidder, founder and president of the Institute for Global Ethics, says that there are 5 core principles that define morality everywhere: honesty, responsibility, respect, fairness, and compassion. Many leaders agree that living by these values is the right thing to do. Yet, standing up for moral principles can sometimes be difficult, carrying risk of humiliation, ridicule, loss of, loss of reputation, or even unemployment. Kidder defines moral courage as the willingness to uphold these core values, even when doing so involves significant personal risk. Let's now look at the 3 circles of moral courage. Moral courage exists at the intersection of 3 domains: a commitment to moral principles at the top, an awareness of the dangers involved in supporting those principles, and a willingness to endure the risk. Principle level. When faced with a choice, leaders can assess the situation to determine whether it requires moral courage and then determine the specific values that need to be upheld. Danger. The second key to moral courage lies in accurately assessing the degree of risk. Leaders need to carefully consider what the potential negative consequences of their actions might be and make a conscious decision that standing up for their conviction is worth the risk. In addition, leaders don't want to overestimate the risk, which could make their actions seem like mere bluster and bravado. Endurance. This is where the rubber meets the road. A leader can understand what key values are at stake, assess the risks involved, and believe in upholding moral principles, yet still lack the courage to act. Leaders need confidence to move from contemplation to action, to be willing to endure the hardship that moral courage requires. They can find this confidence in several areas: their expertise and skills, their character and the values and virtues that sustain them emotionally, spiritual insight, or faith in a higher power, and their gut feelings about what is the right thing to do. Now look at servant leadership. What is servant leadership? Well, according to SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Management, servant leadership is a leadership style that prioritizes the growth, well being, and empowerment of employees. It aims to foster an inclusive environment that enables everyone in the organization to thrive as their authentic self. Whereas traditional leadership focuses on the success of the company or organization, servant leadership puts employees first to grow the organization through commitment and engagement. To understand servant leadership, we must ask ourselves some questions. What is a leader's moral responsibility towards followers? Is it to limit and control them to meet the needs of the organization? Is it to pay a fair wage? Or is it to enable them to grow, create, and expand themselves as human beings? Much of the thinking about leadership today implies that moral leadership encourages change towards turning followers into leaders, thereby developing their potential rather than using a leadership position to control or limit people. The ultimate expression of this leadership approach is called servant leadership. There are three major characteristics that can be investigated in order to develop qualities of servant leadership. In this illustration, a continuum of leadership thinking and practice is seen. Traditional organizations were based on the idea that the leader is in charge of subordinates, and the success of the organization depends on leaders' control over followers. In the first stage, you'll see subordinates are passive, not expected to think for themselves, but simply do as they are told. Whereas in stage two, in the continuum, involves subordinates more actively in their own work. Stage three is stewardship, which represents a significant shift in the mindset by moving responsibility and authority from leaders to followers, creating meaning and purpose for their work and no discretion as to how they sorry, as to how they perform their jobs. This leadership mindset emphasizes a tight top-down control where employee standardization and specialization and management by impersonal measurement and analysis is observed. Let's look at management characteristics. Servant leadership represents a stage beyond stewardship where leaders give up control and make a choice to serve employees. Along the continuum, the focus of leadership shifts from leaders to followers. Let's discuss each stage of this leadership continuum in more detail. The first is authoritarian management, participative management, and stewardship. Authoritarian management. At this stage, power, purpose, and privilege reside with those at the top of the organization. The leaders set the strategy and goals, as well as the methods and rewards for attaining them. Organizational stability and efficiency are paramount, and followers are routinized and controlled along with machines and raw materials. Subordinates are given no voice in sorry about that, in creating meaning and purpose for their work and no discretion as to how they perform their jobs. The leadership mindset emphasizes tight top-down control and employee standardization and specialization and management by important impersonal measurement and analysis. Go on to the next one, participative management. Since the 1980s, many organizations have made efforts to actively involve employees through employee suggestion initiatives, participation groups, and quality circles. Leaders foster employee participation in many businesses. Teamwork has taken on significant importance in the way that work is done. Top executives still have a paternalistic mentality since they establish the agenda, decide on the outcomes, and allocate rewards. Employees can act as team players. They suggest quality enhancements and take responsibility for their own work. But they are not permitted to be actual partners. Essentially, leaders are in charge of the results and serve as coaches and mentors. Even if they no longer have complete authority, they are still in charge of these employees' morale, emotional health, and work output, which might cause them to treat their workers like they are incapable of making their own decisions. Now look at stewardship. I believe that leaders are deeply accountable to others as well as to the organization without trying to control others, define meaning and purpose for others, or take care of others is the standards of stewardship. Stewardship is a fundamental shift in leadership philosophy that gives followers more freedom to decide what to do and how to do it. By giving followers the power to influence objectives, procedures, and organizational structures, leaders encourage leadership amongst their ranks. By putting a strong emphasis on stewardship, leaders can avoid the impulse to control others, set rigid goals, or overprotect the business. Instead, it highlights people who are doing the work in front of them, whether they are producing goods, offering services, or serving customers. Stewardship leadership fosters a partnership which each person meaningfully contributes to the success of the business by guiding without controlling and facilitating without interfering. This strategy encourages complete employee participation and helps an organization adapt to complex environment of today. There are four principles of stewardship. The first is reorient towards a partnership assumption, localize decisions and power to those closest to the work and the customer, recognize and reward the value of labor, and expect core work teams to build the organization. Let's look at reorient towards a partnership assumption. Partnership in an organization occurs when authority is transferred from former leaders to core employees. Partners have the capacity to turn down requests from one another and to remain completely honest, keeping nothing back, even when breaking bad news. In a particular partnership, the vision and purpose must be defined jointly by the leaders and the followers, and both parties are equally responsible for the outcomes. In essence, it is a shared dedication to mutual accountability and collaboration that empowers all involved. Localize decisions and power to those closest to the work and the customer. Decision-making power and the authority to act should reside right at the point where the work gets done. This means reintegrating the managing and the doing of the work so that everyone is doing some of the core work of the organization part of the time. No one should be compensated exclusively for organizing and supervising the work of others. We now look at recognize and reward the value of labor. The organization incentive programs establish a relationship between individual performance and business access. Stewardship seeks to equitably distribute wealth by designing compensation in a way that enables core employees to get significant benefits when they make exceptional contributions. The organization strives to compensate everyone as much as they deserve based on their efforts, and compensation is related to delivering actual value. Expect core work teams to build the organization. Teams of workers who make up the core of the organization or division define goals, maintain controls, create a nurturing environment, and organize and reorganize themselves to respond to changing environment and the marketplace they serve. Generally, stewardship leadership guides the organization without dominating it and facilitate followers without controlling them. Stewardship allows for a relationship between leaders and followers in which each makes significant self-responsible contributions to the organization's success. In addition, it gives followers a chance to use their minds, bodies, and spirits on the job, thereby allowing them to be whole human beings. Stewardship leaders can help organizations thrive in today's complex environment because they tap into the energy and commitment of the followers. The servant leader. The servant leader is a leader who transcends self-interest to serve the needs of others, help others grow, and provide opportunities for others to gain materially and emotionally. Here's a quote from Robert K. Greenleaf. The great leader is seen as servant first. Robert K. Greenleaf inspirational theory came from The Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse, which highlights a character named Leo who was traveling with a group of men. While traveling with these men, he did the most menial jobs well and lifted the spirits of his companions until he left the group. That is when everything fell into disarray. Years later, the narrator is taken to the headquarters of the order, which sponsored the original journey. This is where he was reunited with Leo, who was actually the head of the order. Many doubt that people like that actually exist in the real world, but there are examples like Robert Towson, who was head of the investment department at American Express. He made it his mission to get employees pay, titles, and the recognition that they deserved. David Duffield, former CEO of PeopleSoft, offered $10,000 of his own money to each employee who lost their job as a result of the Oracle takeover. These are four basic precepts in Greenleaf's servant leadership model. The first is put self before interest, self-interest. Next is listen first to affirm others. Third, inspire trust by being trustworthy. And fourth, nourish others and help them become a whole. Let's look at put self before self interest. Servant leaders make a conscious choice to use their gifts in the cause of change and growth for other individuals and for the organization. The desire to help others takes precedence over the desire to achieve a former leadership position or to attain power and control over others. The servant leader calls for doing what is good and right for others, even if it does not pay off financially. In this view, the organization exists as much to provide meaningful work to the person as the person exists to perform work for the organization. Listen first to affirm others. The servant leader doesn't have answers. He asks questions. One of the servant leader's greatest gifts to others is listening, fully understanding the problems others face and affirming his confidence in others. The servant leader tries to figure out the will of the group and then further it however he can. The leader doesn't impose his or her will on others. By understanding others, the leader can contribute to the best course of action. Inspire trust by being trustworthy. Servant leaders build trust by doing what they say they will do, by being totally honest with others, giving up control, and focusing on the well being of others. They share all information, good and bad, and they make decisions to further the good of the group rather than their own interests. In addition, trust grows from trusting others to make their own decisions. Servant leaders give trust because they give everything away: power, control, rewards, information, and recognition. Trust allows others to flourish. Let's look at nourish others and help them become whole. Servant leaders care about followers' spirits as well as their minds and bodies, and they believe in the unique potential of each other to have a positive impact on the world. Servant leaders help others find the power of the human spirit and accept their responsibilities. This requires an openness and willingness to share in the pain and difficulties of others. Being close to people also means leaders make themselves vulnerable to others and are willing to show their own pain and humanity. Generally, servant leadership can be simple as encouraging others in their personal development and helping them understand the larger purpose in their work. Servant leaders truly value and respect others as human beings, not as objects of labor. Organizational leaders need to act from moral values rather than from greed, selfishness, and fear. I now hand you over to my colleague, Ms. Samantha.
Good afternoon, everyone. So now we will be looking.
Samantha, we can barely hear you. Samantha? All right, I'll continue until Samantha gets her audio working. Samantha, you just let me know when that is, please. Any questions so far, class? Okay. We look at leadership courage. What is courage? Leaders frequently need to draw from their inner resources of fortitude and strength in order to withstand pressure and preserve moral principles, especially in the face of mockery, especially in the face of mockery. Some contend that courage is a necessary component of leadership. However, the urge to conform, fit in, and pursue behaviors that result in promotions and pay raises can eclipse the value of courage in huge businesses. Now look at a quote from Nelson Mandela. He states, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but a triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Next, here's a quote from Franklin Roosevelt. He stated, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. So truly, what is courage? Courage is the ability to step forward through fear. Courage is both a moral and a practical matter for leaders. A lack of courage is what allows greed and self-interest to overcome concern for the common good. Executives discover that avoiding mistakes, transferring risk to others, and avoiding failure were the keys to success. But this way of thinking is now outdated. The best leaders in today's dynamic firms solve problems through trial and error, accept uncertainty, and take risks. The defining traits of courage is the ability to move forward despite the fear. People experience all kinds of fears, including fear of death, mistakes, failure, embarrassment, change, loss of control, loneliness, pain, uncertainty, abuse, rejection, success, and public speaking. It is a natural right of people to feel fear when real risk is involved, whether the risks be losing your life, losing your job, losing the acceptance of peers, or losing your reputation. Let's look at traits of a courageous leader. Courageous leaders accept
Hi, Ria.
responsibility. Yes, sir.
I think Samantha wants to get back on.
She wants to be in. Oh, okay,
Yeah, I see
Samantha.
her hand is up. Check with her.
Oh, I can't see it from where I'm presenting.
Yeah, I know, I know.
All right. Okay, go ahead, Samantha.
Are you hearing me now?
No, you're very soft, Samantha.
What about now?
Yes, definitely.
You're still
Oh,
very soft though. Any chance you could move your microphone closer to your mouth?
how's this?
Marginally better. Are you using a clip-on mic or something or headset mic?
Yeah.
Does your laptop not have its own or PC not have its own speaker or microphone?
No, it doesn't.
All right, we'll have to work with that. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The traits of a courageous leader. They accept responsibilities. True leaders step through these learned fears to accept responsibility, take risks, make changes, speak their minds, and fight for what they believe is right. Leaders make a real difference in the world when they are willing to step up and take personal responsibility. Leaders also demonstrate courage by openly taking responsibility for their failures and mistakes rather than avoiding the blame or shifting it to others. Non-conformity. Leadership courage means going against the grain, breaking traditions, reducing boundaries, and initiating change. Going against the status quo. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Going against the status quo is very difficult. It's often a lot easier to stay with what is familiar, even if it will lead to certain failures, than to initiate bold change. The wall of internal fear. Courage means pushing beyond your comfort zone. To take a chance and improve things means leaders have to push beyond their comfort zone. When people go beyond their comfort zone, they encounter an internal wall of fear. Facing this internal wall of fear is when courage is needed the most. Courage means asking for what you want and saying what you think and setting boundaries. The Abilene paradox. This is the tendency of people to not voice their true thoughts because they want to please others. Author and scholar Jerry Harvey told a story of how members of his extended family in Texas decided to drive for 40 miles to Abilene for dinner on a hot day when the air conditioning in the car did not work. They were all very miserable. After the trip, talking about it after, each person admitted they had not wanted to go on the trip, but they went along anyway to please the others. The ability to say no. This is the ability to say no to unreasonable demands from others, as well as the ability to ask for what you want to help achieve the vision. We will now move on to some examples of courage, people with courage. Here we have Denise Plummer, legendary calypsonian. In an interview entitled Women Making a Difference on TTT, the veteran calypsonian and gospel artist shared her remarkable story of resilience in the face of adversity. Denise Plummer was widely known as the Queen of Toilet Paper. During the interview, she recounted the fateful day at Skinner Park when she took the stage to perform her first song, only to be greeted with toilet paper and placards bearing messages like, "Go back to South Africa or go and fix toilets." She endured the onslaught, but things took a turn for the worse during her second song, when projectiles like oranges that were ground into gravel and bottles were thrown at her. Denise Plummer described finishing 2 songs with gravel all in her mouth, all while turning these objects into a choreographic display, concealing the inner turmoil she had felt. Denise Plummer stood out in the world of calypso, as it was predominantly sung by Black men, while she was a white woman. She states that one silver lining of the challenging day was her encounter with Black Stalin. He had encouraged her to not leave, emphasizing that calypso was her culture, just as reggae would be if she were born in Jamaica. This moment in her career marked the beginning of a mentorship with Black Stalin. He took her under his wings and allowed her to open for him during his tours in Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. Ironically, 18 years later, Denise Plummer won the Soca Monarch title with the song "Na Leavin'." And the first person to congratulate her was none other than Black Stalin himself, the same individual who encouraged her to not leave all those years ago. She believed that her defiance paved the way for her success in the music industry. Many others facing similar obstacles in their pursuit of recognition. Next slide, please. This is Malala Yousafzai. She is a Pakistani girl that became a global symbol for girls' education and activism. Malala was born into a family deeply involved in social activism and education. Her father's influence inspired her to advocate for education. However, in 2007, her life took a turn for the worse. Her hometown of Swat Valley was invaded by the Taliban, leading to the closure and destruction of her beloved schools and many others. At only 11 years old in 2008, Malala gave her first public speech at a local press club. She passionately demanded the right to education and challenged the Taliban's actions. As the situation worsened, the Taliban announced that the closure of all girls' schools in the village by January 2009. During this harrowing period, Malala, using the pseudonym Gul Makai, authored 35 blog entries for the BBC. She shed light on the dire conditions and challenges faced by girls seeking to gain education. In February of 2009, Malala's television appearance led to a temporary ceasefire and a conditional reopening of schools. This, unfortunately, was very short-lived because violence resurged and Malala continued her advocacy and documentaries. Eventually, her identity was revealed, propelling her to international recognition. She received nominations for the International Children's Peace Prize and was awarded Pakistan's first National Youth Prize. However, tragically, on October 9th of 2012, she was shot in the head by a Taliban gunman while returning from school. Miraculously, though, she survived and was flown to England for surgery, sparking global protests and support for her cause. UN Special Envoy Gordon Brown initiated a petition that led to Pakistan's first right to education bill, and a $10 million education fund was established in her honor. Malala not only recovered but also spoke at the United Nations on her 16th birthday in 2013. Her inspiring journey has garnered numerous awards, and she also co-authored a memoir titled I Am Malala, the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. Her resilience and advocacy have left an indelible mark on the world, making her an enduring symbol of courage and determination in the fight for girls' education. Now, how does courage apply to moral leadership? There are various people within organizations who have the courage to be unconventional, to do what they think is right, and to dare to treat their employees and customers as whole human beings who deserve respect. Balancing profit with people, self-interest with service, and control with stewardship requires individual moral courage. So how does one act like a moral leader? First, they require personal courage. To practice moral leadership, leaders must know themselves. They must understand their strengths and their shortcomings, knowing what they stand for, and frequently be non-conformists. Honest self-analysis can be very difficult, and it takes courage to own one's limitations and to appreciate others' superior qualities. Moral leadership entails developing relationship. This calls for vulnerability, listening, and sharing major personal experiences with others, and other attributes that many people find frightening. However, developing emotional strength means overcoming one's innermost fears and accepting that emotions can be a source of power rather than a hindrance. True power lies in the emotions that connect people. By getting close and doing what is best for others, sharing the good and the bad, the pain and the anger, as well as the success and joy, leaders bring out the best qualities in others. For instance, William Pence. He is the general manager of Synthetic Fuels Division of Westinghouse. He had to lay off various workers with great personal pain to himself. He had the courage to deliver the bad news, as well as the strength to accept the anger shown to him when the news was delivered. Because of his handling of the situation, the workers realized that the layoffs were a last resort, and the executives at the company were doing all that they could. After a buyer was found for the company, about half of the layoffs were rehired, and they came back because of the humane treatment that they had received. Now we will move on to opposing unethical conduct requires courage, whistleblowing. This means employees' disclosure of illegal, immoral, or unethical practices in the organization. Whistleblowing has become very widespread in recent years, but it is still highly risky for employees who may lose their jobs, be ostracized by coworkers, or be transferred to undesirable positions or even be killed. Most whistleblowers realize they may suffer financially and emotionally from their willingness to report unethical conduct on the part of bosses or coworkers. They step forward to tell the truth despite a jumble of contradictory emotions and fears. Choosing to act courageously means conflicting emotions. Whistleblowers may feel an ethical obligation to report the wrongdoing, but may also feel disloyal to their bosses and coworkers. Some may do battle within themselves about where their responsibility lies. As a result of widespread corporate scandals in recent years, smart companies are beginning to see whistleblowing as a benefit rather than a threat. One survey found that 88% of respondents agree that whistleblowing is good for business. Finding personal courage. How can a leader summon the bravery to act despite the risk involved, to push through uncertainty and fear? If we can overcome our personal anxieties, every one of us has the capacity to live courageously and take courageous action. Most of us have developed concerns that restrict our comfort zones and prevent us from giving our best efforts and reaching our objectives. In order for us to like and accept ourselves, we have been socialized to go along with things we believe to be wrong, not to rock the boat and to follow the norms. We can find bravery within ourselves in a variety of ways, such as through devoting ourselves to causes we believe in, forming relationships with others, accepting failure as a normal and beneficial aspect of life, and harnessing anger. So let's have a look at Sinead O'Connor. She was a well-known Irish singer, praised for her exceptional voice and songwriting skills. Her songs explored a variety of subjects, including politics, spirituality, history, and philosophy. However, her life changed in October 1992 after a performance on SNL, also known as Saturday Night Live. During this infamous performance, after delivering an a cappella rendition of Bob Marley's War, Sinead O'Connor held up a photograph of John Paul II. While saying the lyrics, "We have confidence in victory of good over evil," and she then tore the picture into pieces, flung them towards the camera, locked eyes with the camera lens, and declared, "Fight the real enemy," and then she walked off the stage. So what fueled this reaction? This was because she had read some articles buried in the back pages of an Irish newspaper about harrowing stories of children who had been victimized by priests, and no one believed them, including the police and the bishops to whom their parents reported the abuse some weeks before her appearance. This bold act completely changed the direction of O'Connor's career. The Anti-Defamation League condemned her. She was even booed and ridiculed for months. Ironically, 9 years after she tore up the picture of Pope John Paul II, he apologized to the victims in Australia and the surrounding area. Then, in 2010, Pope Benedict, who is from Ireland, wrote an 18-page letter in which he expressed his true regret for the anguish experienced by the victims of Catholic priest abuse there. Up until her death, she was still praised for having the courage to speak out when others chose to remain silent. Believe in a higher purpose courage. This comes easily when we fight for something we really believe in. Leaders who have a strong emotional commitment to a larger vision or purpose find the courage to step through their fear. The higher purpose overshadows concerns about our own self-interest in business organizations too. Courage depends on belief in a higher vision. For instance, we have Joyce Myers, who stated that a positive attitude gives you power over your circumstances instead of your circumstances having power over you. Just because you feel fear doesn't mean you can't do it. Do it afraid. Drawing strength from others. Caring about others and having support from others is a potent source of courage in a topsy-turvy world. Love is a very strong ingredient of courage because it makes us willing to sacrifice. Think of a loving parent who would put his or her own life in danger to protect a child. Genuine, caring leaders will take chances to support their team members' development and success. The ability to rely on people for support is another source of courage, and the finest leaders aren't hesitant to do so when necessary. People who feel isolated in the world tend to be more cautious because they stand to lose more. People's fear of failure can be lessened, and they may be more willing to take risks if they are part of a helpful and caring team at work or have a loving and supporting family at home. Welcome failure. Do you know before Walt Disney became the billionaire that we all know today, he had a business venture go bankrupt? He stated it's important to have a good hard failure when you're young. Many people nowadays desire success to come easily without any obstacles, issues, or hardships. However, being open to failure and even inviting it inspires bravery because people and organizations can gain useful knowledge from mistakes. Failure can play a constructive role in both work and life. Leaders may reinterpret failure to remove its negative connotations and view it as a crucial first step on the road to success. People discover they have the courage to proceed when they accept failure and are at peace with the worst-case scenario. Leaders are aware that failure may result in success, and that learning from mistakes makes people and organizations grow stronger. There is evidence that with repeated practice, people can overcome fears, such as a fear of flying or a fear of heights. Practice also enables people to overcome the fear of risk-taking in their work. Every time you push beyond your comfort zone, every time you fail and try again, you build psychological strength and courage. Denzel Washington said, "Think outside the box. Don't be afraid to fail big and dream big. But remember, dreams without goals are just dreams that ultimately fuel disappointment." Harness your frustration and anger. If you have ever been really, really angry about something, you know that it can cause you to forget about fear of embarrassment or fear that others won't like you. As such, extreme rage has the power to overcome worries about embarrassment or rejection. And this phenomenon also occurs in workplaces. Managing difficult situations can be accomplished with the help of anger. For instance, a manager may put off terminating someone despite having a good cause until they are compelled by a fit of rage. A person who is normally mild-mannered may be inspired to face their supervisor directly by their fury over an injustice. Self-directed rage can be a source of inspiration for making changes in one's life. The secret is to control your anger. It can be a positive feeling when used in moderation since it gives you the drive to move on. So now we will summarize everything that we covered in this chapter. We looked at a variety of concepts related to moral leadership and leadership courage. We learned that individuals desire leaders who are trustworthy and honest. However, many organizations are experiencing a low point in their ethical climate. Many leaders are under pressure to meet the needs of numerous stakeholders, reduce costs, raise revenues, and appear successful, all of which put pressure on them to act ethically. Leaders must follow moral guidelines in order to establish an ethical organization. When leaders push self-interest excessively, engage in dishonesty, break commitments, and lack the courage to challenge unfair behavior, things go very wrong in organizations. Leaders that uphold the ethics are direct, they are sincere, and they are modest. They continue to care about the greater good, work to be fair, and show the fortitude to defend what is right. Being a moral leader entails displaying the value of helping others and society over maximizing profits or pursuing their own personal gain. The level of moral development is a personal factor for many leaders. To advance both their own and their followers' moral development, leaders use knowledge of the stages of moral development. Higher morally developed leaders put their followers' needs and fundamental values first. The continuum of leader-follower interactions reflects the evolving and developing ideas about control versus service between leaders and followers. The spectrum includes participative management, authoritarian management, stewardship, and servant leadership. Stewardship and servant leadership are two leadership concepts that can aid in creating ethical organizations. The last part that we covered just a while ago covered leadership courage and how leaders might develop their personal courage. The ability to overcome fear, accept responsibility, make changes, take risks, and speak their minds and fight for what they believe in are all examples of having courage. If you want to move on, despite fear, you need to accept responsibility. You need to take risks. You need to fight for what is right and for what you believe in. You must have courage. In organizations, moral leadership and ethical whistleblowing are two examples of courage. Belief in a higher power, interpersonal connections, failed experiences, and controlling anger are all sources of courage. So this will bring us to the end of the presentation for this chapter. Thank you all for listening, and if you have any questions, feel free to direct it towards me and our colleagues.
All right, since I think there'll be no questions, I'll pause the recording.